better jump right in because I think I have 60 slides to try to make it through. So I'm violating the 1 minute per slide rule, so I got 45 seconds per slide. Just a little bit on my background. Cascadian's involved in a number of studies up and down the coast, mostly long-term studies of humpback and blue whales, but we've been involved in some various tagging projects and work also on ship strike, sound, and contaminant issues. I had a natural bias in going through the threats of wanting to touch on each of the threats that I think exist for marine mammals, but then the examples I choose of some of the findings on those tend to disproportionately come from some of the past studies we've been involved with, all of them involving various collaborators, some of them here in this room. In trying to look at what types of threats there are to marine mammals, this was sort of the laundry list I started with. And I'm going to go through each of these, some in more detail than others, and some are also going to be touched on and will be the areas of focus of some of the panel members that we'll be hearing from after my talk. So those I'll kind of jump over quickly. And many of these overlap or have areas where you can see these kinds of lists many places, just broken down slightly differently. But starting with at the top of the list, I put direct takes, because even though we don't have that as a central issue, currently direct takes, meaning intentional direct takes of marine mammals, they certainly are a very valid factor still influencing many marine mammal populations that we study today. And especially with the large whales, it seems like that's in our ancient history, direct whaling off the US coast, but whaling stations operated in San Francisco Bay through 1966. So it's actually within the lifetime of these animals. We're not even one necessarily full generation past where these populations were being directly taken. So many of these species still recovering from either whaling or sealing in the case of some of the other marine mammals. The species impacted were most of the large whales and some of the pinnipeds. Whaling tended to decimate. I just picked one example here of a whaling station. I think this is from up in the Pacific Northwest. They often tended to focus on hunting in a particular area. Usually there'd be a boom period that might last 5 to 10 years, then they'd wipe out that particular population, and then they'd either move on to a different area or to a different species. There are a number of different types of whaling, some of them still active today. Up in the Pacific Northwest, we are still dealing with the fact there is provisions for kind of subsistence takes of whales, both by Alaskan Eskimos, but also the Macaw have an active proposal affecting gray whales for takes, and the gray whales that were spoken of earlier this morning are taken up in the Bering Sea, this same population, under allowed, again, subsistence takes up there. So far, the Japanese research whaling program has not affected some of the populations involved off the California coast, but that could change. They've continually, in the last couple of years, included humpback whales as a species they may include in their scientific research takes. And one of the compromises that may occur in the future may be some sort of trade-off that gets Japan to stop taking in the southern oceans for some sort of a trade of a greater take in the North Pacific. So things could change in those regards. So important to just mention that. And this is an example. Jay showed this slide, what humpback whale populations are doing off the California coast. And again, these are increasing because of the effect of historical whaling takes. Another threat, ship strikes. This is one that has gotten a fair amount of concern and focus of research just in recent years, because in fall 2007 there were a number of blue whale mortalities related to ship strikes. But really the concern about ship strikes goes back quite a bit. On the East Coast, particularly with right whales, it's been a very key issue and concern with right whales. And it's been known that a number of the large whale species, and particularly blue and fin whales, as well as right whales, are very susceptible to ship strikes. And having the very busy ports of Long Beach and LA Harbor here in the Southern California bight, I think it's logically a very important regional threat and concern. An important point I try to make is that even though, let's see if I have this, even though there were at least 5 blue whale mortalities documented in this northern Baja, Southern California area in fall 2007, and at least 4 of them apparently linked to ship strikes, that represents really a minimum number. Because we know from our data the size of these populations and what their mortality rates must be, that only a tiny proportion of the animals that die actually wash up and are documented. The much greater proportion of animals are sinking or washing out to sea. Even with a very coastal species like gray whales, we know that only a small proportion of those animals actually wash up on a beach and are documented. So whenever we're trying to estimate something like ship strike mortality, we have to realize if we're basing that on counts of carcasses washing up on the beach, we're dealing with a dramatic underestimate of how many that is. It could be twice as many, it could be 10 times as many are actually dying. So even though we haven't had a repeat of the really high rate of ship strikes that occurred in fall 2007, it's still a fairly significant number. Even the number documented is bordering in that area that if these were fishery takes, they would be triggering management actions and protections as exceeding this allowed potential biological removal. So it's an important source of concern. And I'm just going to show you a few slides about this. Megan McKenna will talk a little bit more about some of the work with ship path and ship traffic related to sound. But basically we have some of these ship pathways traveling through areas of very high blue whale densities. Ship traffic has been increasing steadily over the years. This is taken from a summary paper John Hildebrand has done recently showing, summarizing some of the data on increasing number of ships and increasing sound in the ocean. The work we've been doing most recently in collaboration with Scripps and Aaron Olson, who is affiliated with Scripps but is also with NOAA, has been actually looking at the behavior, what areas are animals using, where they overlap with shipping lanes, how do animals react to approaching ships. And so we're actually finding animals in the shipping lanes, we're attaching suction cup tags to them, and then we're looking at what they do both over time, what are they doing in the shipping lanes, and also how do they behave when a ship comes through. And we expected this would take 3 years, and we still have several more years of doing this. But we've actually been surprised how much data we've gotten just in the initial seasons, where we've documented a number of these very close approaches by ships of these animals we have these suction cup tags on. And it really has highlighted the risk that they face at. So again, methods, we're using several different types of tags. They're both tags that record acoustics and sound and diving behavior. Some of them, like the second one from the right down, have GPS quality positions, so we can look at movements of animals, not just when we're with them, but also at night when we're not able to track them and see what they're doing. And sometimes we end up with unusual situations like this. This maybe overplays the degree to which these animals are studied. These are 2 blue whales side by side that have 3 different types of tags on them between them. And this is not a normal situation. These 2 animals were in the shipping lanes 2 days, but here's our acoustic tag recording dive behavior, pitch and roll and sound. Here's our Mark 10 GPS tag that's getting us high quality positions of the animal as well as dive behavior. And here's a satellite tag put out by Bruce May that's on one of those animals.